Hello, everybody, and I think we're ready to start tonight. My name is John McAuliffe. I am a poet and the director of the Centre for New Writing here at the University of Manchester, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to the fifth and the last of our online series, Novel Voices, tonight with Jared McGinnis and Natasha Brown. I'm really excited about this event. I can't believe it's the last in the series already, but it's been a wonderful set of events across the semester, and we run them, as you know, many of you, with our partners at the university's Creative Manchester platform and with our bookshop partners Blackwell's and our host and this series curator Ellah Wakatama. Ellah, as again many of you will know, is Senior Research Fellow here at the university, as well as being Editor at Large for Canongate Books, where Jared is in fact one of the authors whose work she's bringing into the world. In 2011, Ellah was awarded an OBE for services to the publishing industry, and she has since then, among many other things, served on the judging panel of the 2017 Dublin International Literary Award and the 2015 Man Booker Prize, as well as inspirationally continuing to develop the Kane Prize and starting and advancing conversations about publishing and culture in the UK. Her plan for Novel Voices this semester has been to introduce you, our audience, to some of the best new fiction being published by first-time authors. Voices you will be hearing for the first time, who we hope you will be hearing from for many years to come. This past week, as we've seen glorious reviews for the debut novel of our previous guest, Catherine Menon, and the shortlisting of Juliana Mensah's novel for the Desmond Elliott Prize, we've had further confirmation of what an excellent set of events these have been. Before I hand over to Ellah, some housekeeping. I know many of you will be really expert in this, but do remember to, some of you have already started doing this, to tell us where it is you're watching from tonight. It's always great to see the places and that these events are taking us into rooms in different parts of the country and around the world too. The Q&A button is just along from the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And if you have questions for Jared and Natasha, can you pop your questions for them into the Q&A box as the event goes on. Tonight as well, we're using a captioning service at the bottom of the screen. So if you'd like to get the text or an approximation of what we're saying, please turn that on as well at the bottom of the screen. And finally, if you are on social media, it's Novel Voices is the hashtag that we're using for this event and the other events. So I'm going to hand over to Ellah at this point to introduce the event proper.
Thank you so much, John, for that lovely introduction. And thank you also to all my colleagues at the Centre for New Writing and at Creative Manchester, and to our partners, Blackwell's. It is wonderful to be here with these two writers. I've been excited over the last weekend. I want to just recap a little bit what we've been doing with the Novel Voices. Over the last 2 months, it's been my great pleasure to host debut writers whose extraordinary work spans genres and geographies. These are the voices I think we should be watching out for. And as John said, some of them have also the choices have also been vindicated with recent reviews and shortlistings. We have met Meng Jin, the author of Little Gods, which is set in China and explores the bonds between mother and daughter. Juliana Mensah joined that conversation with her book, Castles from Cobwebs. Our second event featured Namina Fauna with her exquisitely imagined speculative fiction, The Gilded Ones, and Justin Diebler, the author of a deeply moving story of a mother and son in Lone Stars. Event number 3 was a conversation with Catherine Menon, the author of Fragile Monsters, and Victoria Princewell, the author of In the Palace of Flowers. With these writers, we have journeyed across time and place, touching down in China, Ghana, to the ancient kingdom of Otera. Just in case you go look on a map for it, Otera really doesn't exist, but there we go, we've been there. Justin Diebler took us to Texas, and we also traveled to Malaysia and Persia. This is the joy of reading. finding ourselves in new places at different points in history and seeing the world through a huge range of voices: the woman warrior, the enslaved Africans in the Persian court, the gay son remembering his dead mother. All of these perspectives and lives between the covers of these extraordinary debut novels. This evening, we conclude the series with two equally accomplished debuts: Assembly by Natasha Brown and The Coward by Jared McGinnis. Natasha Brown works in financial services and is a Cambridge University mathematics graduate. Her book is published this June by the excellent team at Hamish Hamilton, an imprint of Penguin Random House. Jared McGinnis is the co-founder of the Special Relationships series of events and is also an associate writer for Spread the Word. He has a PhD in artificial intelligence, and his book was published by Canongate this July. And I should also confess that this particular author, Jared, is special to me, as I'm the one who commissioned and edited his book. Natasha and Jared, welcome. Really happy to have you both here. And as I was reading those bios, I just noticed, so we've got a mathematics graduate and an artificial intelligence graduate, and we're here to talk about creative fiction, which seems absolutely perfect to me. I'd like to begin with a question for both of you. I've read each book several times now, and I'm struck by the level of style and craft you both employ. It seemed to me that along with the compelling stories that you tell, you were both focused on approach, if we can call it that. Natasha, there is for me a real-time, almost documentary feel to the book. It's short and in action it spans very little time indeed, but you managed to pack histories and more than a lifetime's worth of emotion into the work. As an editor, I felt that you had paid special attention to the possibilities of a novel and shaped Assembly into a shape exactly suited for the story you wanted to tell. Will you speak to us a little bit about the decisions you had to make as you set out to write the story?
Well, thank you very much. I think the novel is very, very short. It just spans a couple of days, as you mentioned. And I think for me, I didn't want to do something stylistically unusual just for the sake of it. I really wanted to leverage form as much as setting, as much as characterization, all of that, to really try and bring this woman and her experiences across. So it's really just zoomed in on this woman as she makes this big decision in her life, right? That she's on the cusp of what feels like success to her. And I was hugely influenced as I was writing by Bell Hooks, and in particular her essay, Postmodern Blackness, where she talks about the type of fiction writing that she likes to do, which is experimental with the form, has unusual structures and pulls across, I suppose more criticism and analysis as well as popular culture. And I felt that was just a really invigorating way to think about how to approach the novel. I think over the last few years, I've been really excited by the different forms and approaches I've encountered in novels, and I just wanted to borrow from everything that made sense. And it took a lot of trial and error and iteration to try and find the right way to tell this story. But I just really wanted to, as much as I could, use the form and stretch it as far as I could to really bring the reader into the narrator's confidence so that they understand how she's feeling and can feel as close to her as it's possible while she's going through this tumultuous period.
Thank you for that. And I'm really happy that you mentioned Bell Hooks, because I was sort of in my head making a list of books that it was in conversation with, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And I just wonder if you were speaking about the reader's connection with the unnamed protagonist emotionally. And for me, I felt if the book had been longer, I would probably have been destroyed. And so just the length of it as well, the brevity of it was like this short, intense shock to so many different things. It sounds to me that's something you intended.
Absolutely, yeah, I think that's so key, because I think the sort of tone and voice that I felt I could sustain for a much longer period would have to be different, because I think it hits you differently if you're spending longer with it. I really wanted to make it this intense experience. And find a way to do it that doesn't feel exhausting, doesn't wear you down, but kind of gives you a really vivid experience. So I felt it's a balance, because you don't want it to feel too short and too fleeting, but just really getting it right so that at the end it feels like you've spent enough time in this world, enough time with these characters and the narrator, but you're not totally beat down. I want there to be some, if not hope, then at least some warmth at the end.
Warmth. Yes, I'm going to come back to that in a second. Let me move to Jared. Jared, the protagonist in The Coward is a young man named Jared McGinnis. Even after all of our conversations regarding this book, I remain intrigued by the way the character can be read as you, and then again, it's emphatically not you. We've discussed this tug between fiction and non-fiction, and it was important to you that we made it clear that this was a novel. Can you speak a little bit about the choices you had to make in this regard, and what influenced your approach?
Yeah, I mean, at the core of it, you know, kind of when I wrote this, and it came out of the experience of with other people discussing my work. And I remember when I was doing one of the events, a editor from a daily newspaper said that piece is amazing. Can we use it for, you know, our second, you know, I think it was the family section. And I was like, yeah, of course. And she's like, I was like, just so you know, like I made it all up. And somehow that she's, oh no, we can't use that. And then somehow that like my ability to ex nihilo create a livable, you know, a real world was of less value. And that really did started the horses running. And then it was just because I've kind of built it. It was also to get the story right. And I've kind of said my practice is ridiculous because I've had to write the book 3 or 4 times. And it was like moving towards that. Initially, I tried to keep it away from me as much as possible because I saw so many people kind of just writing about themselves and not really letting the character like, you know, fall and fail. And they were, you know, it was really this esprit d'escalier, you know, trying to really just right all the wrongs and, you know, and win all the battles and stuff like that. And so I moved away from myself, and then I kind of came back to it. And a lot of that came from is that like when I was writing this, no one was ever going to let me not be associated with a character if I wrote about a disabled male character. They were always going to go, it's you. And it's happened many times when I was kind of, you know, toying with this in kind of short story form. And so I said, you know what, let's do it. And I changed it, and I added, you know, I started researching memoirs. And again, I think this might come to kind of having like, you know, a degree in the hard sciences of just like really approaching it like a research problem and looking at memoir and what is memoir, a form separate from fiction, and kind of exploring those mediums. And I have to say, like I've said this before, it was a much meaner book until I met you. And you really kind of like made it much nicer, because I was going to make the reader pay for mistaking me with the character. And every time they did that, I was going to make them suffer for it. And you kind of just reminded me that that's not where good writing comes from. Generosity and just kind of that lived experience that you get to have. And it's not nice to somebody who's, you know, paid $15.99 to just sneer at them for 300 pages. So it became much more kind of like, let's go on this journey together. We're going to explore this character, and at the end of it, we're all going to feel something. And I'm gonna write. It's going to be tough, but it's also going to be beautiful, and it's going to be, because we're all kind of like just messes. But that's in that I find the beauty of it, that despite how disastrous we all are, beauty happens and love happens. And yeah, so it's like, yeah, it's still hopeful, but I'm going to make you work for it. So you're going to come on this journey with me. So.
I love that idea of the vengeful author writing. You said something that was really interesting to me, Jared, and I want to bounce it off Natasha, and see what you think. You talked about how your background in the hard sciences influences how you sort of approach writing. Would you say that that's true? Because you work in financial services, your background is mathematics, Natasha. What was the interaction or the conversation between those two aspects of your life and with the fiction writing?
I think it's an interesting one. It's hard to say a little bit. I think quite a bit like Jared was mentioning, I did approach this as a bit of a project and sort of sat down with other books determined to kind of take them apart and understand how they worked, and the bits that when I'd read them, just reading them, I'd enjoyed, really zooming in on them and understanding what was it about it that made me enjoy it so much. Why did it land the way that it landed? And I really spent a lot of time just on the building blocks, so reading a lot of literary criticism, trying to write in other authors' voices, trying to really just pull apart language and understand how it's being used. And I don't know if that's necessarily something that came from having a background in, say, maths and more analytical things. I think perhaps it's just, I think, especially coming as someone pretty new, always loving reading, but very new to writing, it seems sort of insurmountable to begin with, sort of how you tackle books. So I guess it was a question of eating the elephant one bite at the time. But I don't know how much of that was really, maybe from a maths perspective, how much is just, I guess everyone has their process for tackling writing.
I would kind of to that, like, I think like from the sciences and the maths, you know, if you're working on a proof, you know, you slowly kind of make the problem state, you know, the problem space smaller by removing variables and solving bits of it and stuff like that. And when I came to fiction, it's the absolute reverse. Like, you're moving towards infinity, and it's just constantly going to be greater than you, and it is uncountably infinite. And the possibilities you have with that language. And that, to me, I kind of liked that uncertainty. And it was very different from like my scientific approach, you know, when I was a scientist, kind of constantly reducing to solve my problem. But I knew that it was always going to master me, and, you know, to kind of do that. And that's why I kind of loved it. So, but I immediately chimed in with that idea of like, yeah, you can it's infinite. So
I love that idea of infinity, but also the eating the elephant one bite at a time. Just something that sort of takes persistence and determination and a great deal of self-belief, you know. That's quite big. I've got another question for both of you. Each of you at some point in the writing benefited from creative literary initiatives. So Natasha, I understand that you developed this story after receiving a London Writers' Award in 2019. What difference did that make for you?
I think it made a world of difference. And in fact, so Jared taught one of the masterclasses for that program.
Wow.
And I workshopped assembly in his class.
I had no idea. That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's great. It's really exciting.
It was really helpful. And I mean, Spread the Word, who run that award and a bunch of other programs, it's the London Writers Development Agency. I just found it was fantastic because it demystified the industry, and they kind of split it into two things: the sort of craft aspect of it, and I suppose the career aspect of it. So how the industry works, how a book turns from a Word document into a book, and how you kind of marry your craft and what it is you're trying to do with not being fully commercial, but an ear to how the commercial process works, so that you can understand, because it's all well and good, I think, to focus as it purely as art, but you need to think about, if you want it to get into the world, how that happened. So for me, I think it probably could have still happened some other route, but I think being able to benefit from learning from so many other writers and authors and people who understand the industry, as well as the links, I think that was a really key thing. They kind of, rather than having to break your way into the industry yourself, using someone like Spread the Word, they kind of help you with those introductions. It gives you a big head start and a boost, I think, to kind of getting your work out.
Just as a follow-up, I mean, that link between you and Jared is just magical. I'm glad to know that. But as a follow-up, I'm always really curious about this sort of facing a blank page and starting it. And I wanted to ask you about, when was the point that you knew that, one, there was something you needed to say, and two, that you knew how to do it? What was that sort of point that allowed you to start filling the blank page?
I don't think you ever really know. I mean, that's me as an artist. Like, I work from uncertainty, and I mean, there's an intuitive process where you're like, yeah, something does work, and I think for me, I kind of have to, you know, you just, the more you write, the less you kind of care about the individual words, and you realize actually it's a process that's the joy, and it's just that intuition and work is all you. Saunders is saying intuition and iteration. Just go aim and get there, and you get better and better at it. But like, I don't know. And there was a lot of times I was like, this is crazy. Like, I'm writing a book about a guy in a wheelchair that isn't about being in a wheelchair. Like, nobody, who's gonna write it? You know, it's like, but that was my purpose, and I was gonna do it. And it is definitely bloody-mindedness. It's like, you read the stories and like the same narrative about disability and the same narrative about addiction. And then you look at my book, it's structurally inversed. It's like, no, that's not actually the truth of it. And I was important to me that I've experienced this, I know this, and I'm not seeing this story told. And the books that I'm attracted to are the ones that are telling me the stories that aren't told. It's all the ones that kind of fall through the cracks for whatever reason, and kind of disappear. And those are the people that I kind of looked up to. And it's almost kind of doing homage to them. It's like, I'm gonna do the hard thing, you know. And because why? I mean, this is a lot of hard work. Like, and there's easier ways to make a living. And there's all this uncertainty and anxiety. Like, if you're gonna do it, you got to do it because it matters. And
Yes,
I'm a firm believer of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Natasha, how about you? Thank you, Jared. Natasha, how about you? I guess, you know, the kind of question that my dad would ask me was, who told you that you could do that? And my response would be, you did. So I guess I'm asking you, you know, that moment of, you know, who said you could do that?
Yeah. It's an interesting one. I think it probably a little bit goes back to my parents and my grandparents. Literature and reading and being exposed to a lot of different books was a big part of my lifestyle growing up. And I don't think they ever necessarily thought I was going to write a book, but I felt like just feeling comfortable with words and reading really helped. Just to feel the familiarity with the form that I was then able to play with. But what, Jared, you were saying about kind of creating this representation that you hadn't really seen before, I think that resonated so much with me. I felt as I was just exploring with writing, exploring with the characters and the world, the narrator just really came out to me as her own person and her own voice and her own narrative decisions that weren't necessarily mine. But I think it felt increasingly, as I went on, like a responsibility to give her the space to exist and the space to speak, and to really bring life to a woman who is like my friends and is like me and lives a life that I recognized. And I felt it was really an opportunity to create someone who felt very real to me, as well as open a bit of a window into a particular life, because I think the narrator finds herself in particular corporate environments and particular social environments. I think one of the great things about books is it lets you explore being in a situation without actually being in a situation. And I think it's really important. When I wrote it, I thought about myself 10 years prior and what kind of a novel would have been useful to me then. And I really tried to keep that in mind with how I explore the situations the narrator navigates.
I think that for me, that was key, what you were saying about what book would have been useful 10 years before, because I'm a lot older than you and I could have used this book 30 years ago. I would have made very different decisions. And so I was grateful to read it now and also to know that, you know, hopefully through writers like yourself, people won't make those 30 years worth of mistakes as well. Jared, Natasha used a really interesting word, and I think it was responsibility, about sort of your responsibility to the characters, not so much to the wider world, but to the characters, and I guess honoring them as well. For you, when you're writing Jared, how does that dynamic work? What is your responsibility to book Jared? What is writer Jared? What is his responsibility to book Jared?
I think with all my characters, I feel responsibility. I mean, it's whether it's to the character or just the experience of reading. Like, what I like is that I have all these false memories in my head, the things I've never possibly done. And I always use the example of Germinal. Like, I've been in a miners' riot in the, on the French border near Belgium in the 19th century because of Zola's work, right? And I've, just the things that I've seen, and that's what I want. And if you get it wrong, it's that kind of like, just like that, somebody tapping you at a dream. And like, you get so few of those as a writer, and especially now, there's just so much writing out there and so much good writing. So you really like, it really is an obsession with me that I never want to disturb that dream of the reader. I want them kind of in this world. You know, I think we're all readers here. It's like when the world disappears and somehow the book is read, like, and you're like, you were just, oh wow, that whole day just went. And that is my goal, is to create that same experience that I've just loved so much. And, you know, talk about like who, you know, got me to write, and just like it was such a, like, so many happenstances. You know, I come from a family of just big characters of like, if you want to do it, go do it. No one's going to help you. And, you know, you see that thing, go get it, you know, and just that. And then teachers, like I have these teachers that I was a terrible kid and a terrible, you know, a real pain. But I had teachers in middle school and then in high school who recognized there was something I loved, and I would get extra credit, or I wouldn't, like, you know, she just, if I wrote a short story, I would get extra credit. And I know now that she basically is like, if he's writing something, he won't disrupt my class. And the same with, you know, my senior year, all the students were trying to choose the smallest book. And she's like, and the biggest one was Les Mis. And she said, if you read that, I'll give you 2 grades instead of just 1, and stuff like that. And, you know, what other, you know, 17-year-old boy is just weeping over, you know, 19th century, you know, 1848 in you know, kind of in Paris. And it is, I still, you know, I think about them, I think about bits of Les Mis, and I still get teary, because
I completely believe that about you. And that I think everybody who writes or who is sort of obsessed with books has got that English teacher story. So it's good to hear yours. Natasha, speaking about sort of getting lost and losing a day in a book, as I was rereading the book over the weekend, I found myself underlying and then reading passages out loud to my 19-year-old daughter, saying, listen, you have to know this. It's a breathtaking and a brutal work. It's one that left me quite triggered, as they say. I also found myself inspired by rage, and I may have shouted, yes, that's what it was, quite a few times. I want every Black woman to read it, and then I want the rest of humanity to read it too. And I wondered if that triggering of memories that women of color will share on reading your book, and about that inspiring rage, is that something that you anticipated? Is that something you recognize?
I don't think I anticipated it. I mean, all I can say is I'm so delighted to hear that was your response. I think what I was really trying to do was write from a place of Black subjectivity, and have the novel not be an instance of where we're looking at this Black woman and we're watching her, but actually a situation where she's speaking. And as the novel progresses, she really takes control of the novel and starts to develop her own voice and her own opinions and some agency within her story. I felt like I wanted it to be honest to the conversations I have with my friends and the conversations I have with my sister. I wanted it to feel like you're in conversation with the narrator, and while, you know, not everyone's going to agree with what she says, the decisions that she makes, that it felt real and honest and really engaging with, I think, some of what we deal with every day as Black women. And I think it's difficult because we are just in real life, and because fiction, it, you know, reflects real life, inundated with depictions of Black women suffering and Black pain. And I think a big part of the challenge writing this was, okay, how do you operate? How do you create in a medium where our pain is just used so often, almost to the point where it's undervalued? So I didn't want to lean into pain too much. I wanted to keep it, not ignore it, but try and turn it into something meaningful and something that was a conversation starter. So I'm absolutely delighted that you had that response to it, because I really hoped it would engage like that.
Yes. I wonder, Natasha, if you'd like to read to us from Assembly now, so we can hear that narrator's voice.
Absolutely. So I won't give too much context, I'll just jump in. 1, he's not shy about it. He stands there, legs apart, in rubber-soled shoes and a cheap suit, watching, just 2 meters away. His eyes expectant hold onto your body. His fingertips tap at a 2-way radio. The deafening static of his suspicion builds as he trails you through the aisles. He stays a few strides behind you wherever you go. Your movements are calm and deliberate, but you feel your pulse pound in your neck. You should look right at him, confront him, demand a reason at least, but you can't. You know you can't. A buzzing in your bag startles you. You hesitate, nearly ignore it, but then pull yourself together, say, come on, and fish the phone out from your bag. Feel the crackle of his attention down your neck and along your arm, through your palm and into your fingers as they fold around smooth plastic and your thumb slides up. Hello, says a disembodied voice. He's watching, watching, watching. 2. Outside the corner shop, over the road from your secondary school, there's often a queue of girls waiting. A shop assistant turned bouncer for the after-school rush stood at the door. 2 at a time, get in line, 1 in, 1 out, he intoned as if reciting from a holy text. But then he'd wave in 2 or 3 girls who hadn't bothered with the queue. Schoolgirls with cherried lips, clumpy black eyelashes and blonde hair that fell in limp curls about their shoulders. He waved them in. Then he glared at the queue, told it to keep the noise down. 3. New York, Sunday night. London, Saturday morning. You fly the round trip regularly for work. But the attendant stops you. At Heathrow, Sunday afternoon, the attendant lunges into your path before you can reach the business desk, places a firm hand against your upper arm. The attendant's fingers, who knows what else they've touched, now press into the soft grey wool of your coat. You look down at this hand on your body, at the flecks of dirt beneath its fingernails, the pale hair sprouting from its clammy skin. And then its owner, the attendant, points and speaks, loudly, as though you won't understand, says, regular check-in is over there. The attendant won't acknowledge your ticket, no, just waves you over to the long queue. It winds back and forth, penned in between ropes, all the way to the regular check-in desk. The attendant says, yes, there's your line, over there. 4. Walking from the library back to college one evening, you spot them huddled on the bridge, faces lit sickly green by their phones. A couple have bikes, one girl leans over the side, spitting into the river below. Talking slows as you approach. They twist and turn their attention towards. You keep your pace, left foot, then right. Keep your head down, keep going. There is no back or even forwards, realize this. There's only through it, endlessly, treading it. This hostile environment, this hostile life. And then that word, that closed sesame word that imbues even kids on a bridge with the wealth and stature of this great British Empire. Its architecture, its walls, statues loom magnificent on every side. The word the spitting girl spits at you before spraying more saliva through her teeth, rips into silence, not water this time. This time they're laughing and you're past them and you don't look back, you just keep going and ignore behind you the winding kick-spun sound of pedals spinning fast on their bikes. Don't look. Thanks.
Thank you, Natasha, thank you. I have one other question for you before we move on to Jared, and it's a question that I think for me connects your books in an interesting way. I want to talk about the body as you write it, but I thought about Ta-Nehisi Coates in Between the World and Me, where he says the spirit and the soul are the body and brain, which are destructible. That is precisely why they are so precious. And then I thought about Ma Suggs in Beloved, who tells her congregation to love each and every bit of their bodies, because out there, yonder, as she calls it, you know, the country seeking to destroy the Black body. In assembly, that idea of the body as a repository of constant stress and tension, of a sustained state of hypervigilance, it's wrought so powerfully. Can you tell us more about your thinking about that connection between the body and the spirit and the Black body as it moves throughout this world?
Absolutely. I'm really glad it kind of brought some of that up, because I feel that was kind of the undercurrent through everything. Citizen as well, which was a huge influence of mine, explores it as well. I think the concept of weathering, so the impacts, the cumulative impact of racism on Black people. So, as a whole, we experience worse healthcare outcomes, lower life expectancy. I think from the moment I first heard about that phenomenon, it felt like something I'd observed in life. And I feel that sometimes we hear these statistics about, death in childbirth for Black women, about, cancer rates and cancer mortality rates. And I think sometimes they just feel like statistics, or perhaps they feel like a milder form of some of the other instances of racism that we see. But I really wanted to zoom in on what does it mean when your experiences in the world are manifesting in your body, and how does that impact a person, and really laser focus into one woman and her experience of weathering, and her experience of how physically and mentally she's processing the way that she moves through the world. And it's the only experience she has, but it's what she's living through. Just really trying to get into that. And I think it's not something I have any real answers for, but in terms of one of the problems I think that I was writing around and trying to understand and explore through writing, is absolutely that idea of, as a Black person, sometimes you are just reduced to being a body. And what does that do to a person when that's how you're seen? And, I guess I don't have any easy answers, but I did want to explore that.
I think what's important are the questions, and I think that the way you encourage one to ask those questions, for me, was so important and so powerful. Both you and Jared mentioned control and honesty. Jared, I'd like to move to you. The Coward opens with a chapter in which your protagonist wakes up in a hospital after an accident and finds he's lost the use of his legs. It's something the doctors tell him, but it takes a very long time for him to actually believe it. What I love about your book, and there's so much, is that you do not, as we often see in news stories and novels, equate that loss, that new state of being, with automatic sainthood. There's a lot about book Jared that is, shall we say, challenging. Now, you've talked a little bit about that, but talk to us about sort of the decisions you made about how you would write this sort of life-changing, catastrophic event, and what you wanted to do and what you didn't want to do.
Yeah, so absolutely was not going to be a triumph over adversity. It was kind of, it's a book. It's actually two threads going on in this book. Actually the in my head, it was basically, this event happens and it seems like this is the end, but actually it's an opportunity, and it really is the best thing that could happen to this character. And that's the starting point. The kind of practicality of it is, I didn't want to do like the Rocky montage of him getting slowly stronger, but the fact is I did have to get him moving. I had to get the reader to move along with me. A reader who isn't necessarily in a wheelchair, to kind of understand that. And so that physicality really is essential, and the kind of disconnect between the body and the mind is, this is it's very explicit in the beginning. And then as I think I've won the reader over, it kind of gets quieter and it's there. But it was really about like that disconnect of like, he still thinks of himself as an able-bodied person. And he's getting pissed because everyone's treating him like he's disabled, but like he's in a wheelchair. And that cognitive dissonance is what creates a kind of tension in the beginning, and then the tension moves as he gets more comfortable with the physicality. And that, again, that's I want to induce that kind of understanding. And the big thing is, the big question is, what happened to him? What happened? And I don't let you know until you've gone on this journey with him and you've earned the right to know. You don't get to walk up to him and say, what happened, as this is what you get all the time. Everyone loves to kind of share their story about like 3 months, they're 3 weeks in a wheelchair or whatever, like as if that has anything to do with my life. And I wanted to capture that kind of absurdity and that. And so, yeah, that
so
was
there's
kind of
that reduction of you or book Jared to the chair. So
yeah,
it becomes
yeah. And that's why I loved when I read Assembly, and I kind of like, I really saw the kind of just the interesting kind of contrasts and comparisons between our two works. And we've approached the very kind of similar problem of being othered, but with completely different experiences, stylistic, very different. So I was talking to Natasha that like, I tend to like paint my novels in kind of very thick and blurred impasto, whereas, you know, she has worked in this kind of very kind of, you know, delicate watercolor, but they're both pretty brutal. They're both pretty brutal, you know, tragedies of what it's like to be in a world in which you are othered. And I was just so amazed by, like, you know, just to show the kind of infinitude that is inherent in telling the human experience. And I just love the kind of comparison stylistically, you know, the settings, one's in America, one's in the UK. I think also in kind of tradition, I think mine's very kind of steeped in kind of the American South tradition and kind of American Gothic, American grotesque. And hers is a very kind of classic English novel. It's you know, I mean, I'm so hard not to talk about it, but like it really follows that like classic, you know, story. Like it's you know, it's
there's definitely a conversation going on there with other works. Jared, I just, before I invite you to read and respond to what you was saying about the sort of the Southern Gothic and the setting, as book Jared is released from hospital, your protagonist makes this really difficult choice to contact a father he hasn't seen since he ran away from home years ago. It's a difficult, codependent, and really significantly dysfunctional relationship that they have. And yet it's one that, to an extent, for me, defines the book. It's a particular kind of masculinity. It's a strange kind of love that you're exploring here. Can you speak to us about that?
I think, yeah, sure, because it's that thing you still see, like these books are talking, that we don't get to talk about these, but like we try to pretend, and we talk about kind of like, you know, kind of outcomes, like, you know, the suicide rates of men, because we don't talk, and like these kind of very kind of caustic things that we've imbibed. And that's why the title became the title, because it's what is the worst possible thing for a man, right? And you know, I'm learning French right now, and it's like there's actually no feminine form for a coward in French, right? It's le, lash, right? And but I think that's true in English as well. We just don't have the explicit gendering of our language. And I mean, we can get into why that is and all that. And that was, to me, these men think they are failures, yet it's the emotional bravery that happens in this book that defines them, defines the relationship. And it takes work to get there because they've destroyed it. And that's the, you know, those are the two narratives that kind of, you know, Jared looking back now that he's kind of in his wheelchair and he can literally, you know, the coward can no longer run away, literally. He's got to think about the decisions that he's made in his life and how got him to what happened that night that he lost his legs. And that exploration is exactly that. As he looks back, things are happening in the present that draw him towards choices he made in the past. And the heart line has always been the relationship between the father and the son. And I've always been very kind of true to that. And kind of, you know, even in kind of our conversations, is anytime I've kind of strayed, you know, we've pulled it back and just kept it out, because I really think, you know, the heart line of this story is this relationship, and to keep that taut.
It really is. Yes, it really is. Jared, introduce us to Jared. Will you read to us? I think you've got about a 4-minute. I'm so enjoying this double Jareding.
And Natasha called him Jared Prime. I thought that was pretty good. All right. When I woke up in the hospital, they told me my girlfriend had been killed. She wasn't my girlfriend, but I didn't correct them. The first weeks were a confusion of morphine, fluorescent strip lighting, a scrubs-clad stranger telling me I wouldn't walk again. She said something about a wheelchair, and I said I preferred crutches, still not understanding. Each morning arrived too early and too loudly, delivered by the clatter of the curtain being pulled back, nurses gossiping, machines beeping, patients calling out, mop buckets, wheels squeaking, relatives arguing, doctors talking, toilets flushing, my own voice in my head counting over and over the stupidities that got me here. I resented being pulled from the vivid dreams where I walked, wasn't in constant pain, and hadn't met Melissa that night. Steeped in painkillers, muscle relaxants, anticoagulants, and antispasmodics, my brain turned dreams into stage reenactments of my life. I took every chance and every pill to see what vignette of my past that sleep would play for me. These dreams were more real than the washed out moments awake in hospital. The characters' wigs were askew and the cast not quite right for the parts, but I was the director. When the dialogue turned against me or the narrative galloped away, I stopped the action, repositioned the players, and began again at the top of the page. I edited dialogue so I said what I should have said. I cut whole scenes from my life. I was redrafting the story because I didn't like the ending. My neighbor was a good old boy who broke his neck on a fishing, mostly drinking trip. His fishing buddies, his family and girlfriend visited every day, and every day I opened my eyes to his nightstand full of greeting cards. Every day, a card with a cartoon dog surrounded by smiling sunflowers. Another card with a smiling sun, another sun, one with flowers, all cheerily commanding, get well soon. Fuck you dog, fuck you flowers, fuck you sun. For the first months, I'd been put into a back brace before being sent downstairs for physical therapy. The orderly adjusts my legs one by one. My damaged nerves reported an ambiguous pull at my hips. But when he touched my feet, it felt like they were dipped in scalding water. My feet would turn bright red from the gentlest of touches. The doctors and physical therapists assured me this was normal. At the center of the physiotherapy room, a set of 3 steps stood like an altar. An elderly man, lopsided from a stroke with a driftwood gnarl of the left arm, struggled to lift his leg onto the first step while the therapist hovered around him with murmuring encouragements. Half a dozen wheelchair-bound patients, old, young, fat, thin, white, brown, black, worked away at their weight machines or hand cycles. A line of grotesques and the pitiable, and I was one of them. Gooble gobble, gooble gobble.
Thank you, Jared. Thank
Stop
you.
there.
That's a great introduction. I have been really selfish all throughout the series, and I always run over time because I have so many questions. So I'm going to do really well in this last session, and I'm going to go to the audience now. And if there's time, I'll add on my questions at the end. We have one question from Barry, who says, Natasha said she'd thought of she had her younger self in mind as her ideal reader. Which reader did Jared have in mind while writing?
Yeah, I don't.
So say it again? Yes. Who did you have in mind? So if Natasha had her younger self in mind.
Yeah, so I didn't actually. It was, to me, it's like what is true it's the story, it's the novel and what works there, and to make sure every, as you kind of set, trajectories, that every kind of thing bows back toward the piece. And really, to me, it's a very like a novel form, as I kind of was traditionally I was writing much more short stories. Novel gave me an opportunity to work on architecture, and I really love that. So to me, I don't kind of think about the ideal reader. To me, it's about what's truest to the work, and what kind of delivers what, the kind of payload that I'm looking for. So,
yeah. Natasha, would you like to sort of go back to that question? And I know you mentioned that, but following on from what Jared said, is it just the younger self you're thinking of, or who else do you, if indeed there's anyone who you're thinking of as you write?
I think the younger self was always the guiding person to come back to, because I think particularly one thing I think helped a lot with writing was workshopping, getting a lot of different people's perspectives coming from different backgrounds. And I think it is important, particularly when writing from a voice that maybe isn't the default voice, to think of how to make it accessible to other people. And I did want to fold that in. But when there were conflicting ideas, or I wasn't entirely sure which way to go, I felt like that was always my guiding sort of priority. So I think it was very helpful as a compass, I guess.
That's a really great point. If I could pick up on that, this idea of like, if you are kind of like underrepresented in any way, and I think it's called like the explanatory comma. For certain audiences, you have to explain. The classic example is Tupac. You have to say like, Tupac, comma, da 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 da, comma. And that's the extra decision you have to make of like how much you're going to bring them along, or it's up to them to do their damn research. And that's a really interesting point that I think is an additional challenge if you are going to try to tell stories that don't have that much airing. Whereas like other stories, or you can kind of lean on the fact that they're the standard kind of the story that you've heard enough, so you can borrow from those. If you're the first one telling that, you got to make that decision, and that's a really interesting one. I think Natasha did too as well. Is that like you got to come along. If you don't know this LBJ quote, go look it up, do your work, and
you're so ruthless, Jared. Listen,
I actually thought with the coward, like the wider characters, so Book Jared's family, the people he encounters in the town, I felt at first they seemed like recognizable archetypes, I guess, and I thought I knew who I was dealing with. And what I loved was how, as the novel went on, they unfolded, and I felt there was a real kindness. And interesting you mentioned it, there was a meaner version of the book, because what really struck me was the kindness, and as time went on, I really understood these people with more depth than I think them seeming like standard American characters, I guess. And it was the initial sense that I got, and I felt that just broadened it out and gave me more insight and depth into this world, and the way that the ugly things they sometimes did to one another came from places that weren't bad.
I think that for me as a reader, that I was thinking about a way to describe both of you, a phrase that would sort of just encapsulate what you both were doing, and it was truth-telling. There was a truth-telling at the heart of both of these books that was really important to me. I have another question from the audience, and this one is from Nick, who says, as first-time novelist, was there a conscious decision in what would become your first novel? Was there a story you wanted to tell first, or was it something that had to be told now? And Nick is really interested in how first novels framed writing careers. Who wants to tackle that one first?
I mean, mine's easy. Like, I just know it was like this. I really tried not to write this because, again, it was just so annoying. Like, I knew it was going to be done, but it had to be written, and I had to finish it. And it was too vivacious. It still lived and whispered to me in the drawer of the desk, and I just had to do it. And like, I am not someone to look at for like strategic views of careers in any way. I'm the only one with a PhD in AI who hasn't figured out how to be a millionaire. So don't look at me in my career. Right? It just is what I had to do. And I would say for like writers, don't think about the first book. You just write what you got to write, and that will be the best thing, and that will be the thing that gets attention. And it just happened to be that it was this very kind of close story and career of like, I mean, I haven't had a career yet. My book's not even out yet, so I don't know. So
Natasha, how about you? Thank you, Jared.
Yeah, I think that point is so key. It's so difficult to know how things will go and what was a good decision around the approach, and what maybe wasn't so much, and how it will shape how people receive you. I think people say don't write to market, but I think I was very conscious of what Black millennial fiction looked like, and the sort of thing I felt I could get published, and trying to marry, I guess, the constraints of that form of literature with the type of story that I wanted to tell. And I felt there was a bit of tension between writing something that looked familiar as a Black woman's debut novel, as well as writing something that was kind of pushing out into the directions I wanted to push in. And that potentially wasn't needed. And I think I've been really fortunate working with Hermione, who's my editor, who's had so much understanding and I think flexibility in terms of what I was attempting to do. But I think I was mindful of that, because I think it seems very closed, publishing and books, particularly for a long time. I'd really mostly read the classics and old books, and understanding how new books got out, I think there was a bit of calculation to it, I guess you could say. But I think it's hard to really know what makes sense and what doesn't.
I just want to come back to an earlier question I had for you, Natasha, based on what you were saying. I felt very much that this book was a continued conversation between you and other Black writers, both contemporary and also across the ages. Is this something that you'd necessarily acknowledge? And if so, besides Bell Hooks, whom you've mentioned, who are the writers that you think most influenced your contribution to that ongoing conversation?
I think Claudia Rankin, Citizen and Don't Let Me Be Lonely, I think they kind of blew open my understanding of what literature could do, and were really important to, I think, making it seem possible to tell the story the way I wanted to tell the story. So I think that she was definitely huge. Frantz Fanon, I started reading, and I'm still dipping my toe in, but I think just understanding all of these writers, I think in, you know, what was it, the 60s and the 70s, and when there was just so much interesting Black literature coming out, I essentially bought a massive book on post-colonialism with essays from all different authors and just made my way through. And I felt like I was being exposed to so many different ideas, and not just necessarily Black authors, but the authors or the other writers and thinkers who were influencing them too. Edward Said, now we're going to start blanking on names.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's a wide range, and it's really interesting to hear that. Jared, I'm about to ask you the same question. Before I do so, Natasha, one final question for you. There's a lot about your book, and I think, you know, when you reference Claudia Rankin, I found this in Citizen as well, where I felt that you were saying secrets out loud, things that I didn't want other people to know about me, that kind of, those calibrations you make and things that you do because of survival, but, you know, when you think about them. So they're things that I didn't want to think about. And I was really grateful to you and your character for pushing me to think those. I wondered, what was the most challenging, what was the most difficult thing to write down?
I think in a sense, I think one of the hardest things was engaging with British colonial history, and how to do that in a way that didn't feel like an essay, that didn't feel like nonfiction writing, but kind of got across the impact that I think it has on a lot of folks whose family history is tied up in, I guess, how modern Britain came to be. And I came at it from a lot of different angles, and it was really, I think, difficult to vocalize something that felt true to the character and how it was impacting her, and also something that felt useful to other people. It wasn't just, you know, one.
You give us a profit and loss account that I just found. I'm probably going to frame it somewhere because I found it so powerful. So it's interesting to me that you'd pick that one out, because yeah, that really resonated. It was wonderful. Jared, I guess it's not two questions to close off with you, but the first part of it is, you know, who were the writers that you feel you were in conversation with? And then also, what was the most challenging truth for you to sort of try and express in the book?
Well, that second one's that's a doozy of a question. I'm gonna go with the easy one first, because that is an amazing question. That's a really good question, especially the work that is so personal. I really think that's interesting. I mean, who I'm interaction with, I read very promiscuously. I'm all over the place. But I think when it comes down to it, you know, I'm a storyteller. I, you know, come from a family of storytellers. And in the Southern tradition, I would say that being able to marry humor with kind of real kind of weight of emotions, and to be able to balance between those two. And there's really funny bits, but like, again, I'm only doing it because I want to make you cry a little bit later, and to get you to go from here down to there and then back up to there. It's really what I want. I want to just, you know, this roller coaster. And so the people who can really do humor, but still keep kind of weight to it. And like, I mean, I was thinking about, Sebald. So Sebald was a huge, like, when I discovered him when I moved to the UK, and I just like told me about Sebald, and like, so he's kind of really kind of weighty guy, but he's actually hilarious. Like, he's really funny. And then like, but people don't talk about that weird thing of people tend to be too po-faced. I think especially in the UK about literature and about ourselves, you know, you can't crack a smile, and it's like, well, you know, I don't think that's true to human experience. And if you look at the classics, there's, you know, the Russians are funny. And I mean, more recently, I was thinking like Paul Beatty in The Sellout has literally one of the funniest chapters I've ever written in my life. I think it's chapter 3, I was reading on the train and people were moving away from me because it was just hilarious. Like, I mean, and it just, but also kind of transgressive. And I think that's an interesting thing, is like humor is that's how you get away with the transgressions, to point out just the absurdity and the ugliness that we voice on other
that
humans.
is certainly, yes, that's certainly very clear in The Coward, is that sort of dark humor. But I'm not going to, we're almost out of time and you can't dodge my question, Jared. I want to know, what was the most difficult?
What was the most difficult one? That's really interesting. I was like, I think it was really the moments of real emotional vulnerability, because I really had to dig down and look at some stuff that I had to deal with, and that I just kind of did the man thing and be like, move it away, I'm in a wheelchair. And I have to say, like, writing a novel is a great way to get, it's a much cheaper way to get therapy, because I have to say, having really kind of poured it into the book, there was a lightness. It was like, I've dealt with that. And I have to say, it was that real kind of the emotional vulnerability that, and I had to definitely go into my own and figure that out. And yeah, I'm much more pleasant because I've written this novel. So yeah.
We have another hour in us for this conversation, but our time is up. Natasha and Jared, one of the things that, as an obsessive reader, I'm always chasing that high. I'm always chasing the book that'll make me wake up changed. Your books did that for me, each of them. And I'm so grateful. And thank you so much for joining me this evening and allowing me to ask all my questions and to introduce you to the Novel Voices audience. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you who've joined us over the series and certainly this evening. And watch these writers. They're important, and read these writers. Because you'll find yourselves changed too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night.